dawn. It's a sea of green, it's the biggest thing we've ever seen. Thousands queuing from the break of day to see the big parade out Savannah way. Where the shamrocks blessed, we're giving thanks. The bishops from Cork who sing the banks. Take a drink of the Mountain Dew, watch us dance a jig and a hornpipe through the door. Daddy down Savannah way. Daddy on St. Patrick's Day.
Has he been doing well this year?
Oh, excellent,
He looks like he's a little bit stubborn.
Well, he's like Ansley. Ansley's a little stubborn too, but he'll be all right.
Forsyth, Barker, Tubal Street, there's 400,000 people to meet. Within the Oaks and Abercorn and hands in the drive, salute the Irish as we pass by the night. So
we've been waiting for you. Bless your heart. Oh, man.
The Sefton blues have blown away. Things turn green St. Patrick's Day.
Strong.
Daddy down Savannah way. Daddy on St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Top of the morning to you, gentlemen.
And the rest of the day to you.
It begins in a hail of tapping at the end of February and continues through the election of the Grand Marshal, the greening of the fountain, the reverencing of their ancestry. It spreads over one bridge onto Hilton Head Island and then another one to Tybee, then down I-95 to Shellman Bluff.
Down home Southern people having a good time.
It's fashion, food, and beverage throughout the Southeast in the annual celebration of the season of St. Patrick.
It's not a day in our corner of the world, it's a season that begins in late February and extends all the way till the end of March. But even that expanse of time doesn't explain how Savannah becomes the center of the universe on March 17th.
I sort of by default became the St. Patrick's Day Parade Director.
Craig Harney has been directing the St. Patrick's Day Parade for WTOC and covering the Irish for 35 years now. In that time, he's seen the celebration expand out into February.
You couldn't pile anything else into March 17th, so these guys started spreading it out through earlier in the month of March, even into February. It almost touches Christmas.
So with the expansion of Irish popularity in Savannah came a deeper understanding of the culture here.
Yeah, we're sitting in Emmett Park, Tim. This is, to me, the most beautiful place in the city. The oaks and the greenness of it. Matter of fact, at one time it was called the Irish Green, because this is where those immigrants came off of the river, and then they settled on Houston Street and East Broad Street in what they call the Old Fort section, and had bonfires in Washington Square. It's all legendary. Just behind us is the Celtic Cross, but the Celtic Cross wasn't erected until 1983. So only recently have we begun to really examine the deeper history of the Irish in the city. Mike Manhattan and I, about 15 years ago, got a chance to do a story on the Jeanie Johnston, one of the ships that came over from Ireland.
Between 1845 and 1855, the failure of the potato crop forced more than 2 million Irish to flee the Great Hunger on wooden sailing vessels, tall ships of the 19th century. The voyage from Ireland to America is nearly 4,000 miles, up to 2 months on the dark and dangerous depths of the Atlantic Ocean, on ships like the Jeanie Johnston, a sailing replica and a living testament to the emigrant experience. These ships often sailed with some 300 souls, cramped human cargo, not enough food, too many diseases. Travelers did not always survive the crossing.
And these ships were then called famine ships, and a lot of them, because their record of losing a lot of passengers, were called coffin ships.
The coffin ships called on the port of Savannah. Irish historian Jimmy Buttimer says they often came directly from County Wexford in Ireland. On one such ship, ancestors of Savannah's Mahonys, attorney Tom Mahoney's kin. he's returned to Ireland to see the place where his family's American experience began.
Walk on that dock where all those ships left from. And that's a real strange, eerie feeling to walk on that dock, knowing that thousands and thousands of people left there, never to return.
Takes you back hundreds of years.
River pilot John McCarthy navigates the tall ship up the Savannah, watching the tides and currents and avoiding trouble. As they pass the bluff where the original Irish landed, the newcomers cannot know that a monument to those Irish immigrants sits just out of view behind the trees in a green circle called Emmett Park. But Tommy Brunson knows.
It was called the American Wake. And it was when usually the oldest son, not always, but usually, was the one that was leaving home from Ireland. Money had been begged and hoarded away and collected to send him on the trip to America. So the night before he left, they had a wake, just like we will have tonight for our Aunt Annie, mine and Mike, Aunt Annie, who passed away yesterday. The only difference in that wake and the wake we will have tonight is the person they were waking really wasn't dead, but he was going to America. But he knew, and they knew, that he would never see his parents again.
You're good. You're good.
Savannah Irishman Jerry Hogan handles the lines for the Johnston and leads the welcoming party of familiar Irish faces. Captain Michael Coleman says this happy landing bears no resemblance to those at the end of the 19th century Irish exodus.
2 months of real hardship. These people, when they got off the boat, were just skin and bone. The fact that so many people made it and survived is a great tribute to the tenaciousness and courage of the people of the time, because these times were the blackest and darkest of times.
3 cheers for Savannah! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
The Jeanie Johnston spent 9 days docked on the waterfront, a very real connection between the dark chapter of 19th century Irish experience and the 21st century Savannah, just as the coffin ships themselves were a bridge between the long-suffering Ireland and the new promise of America. Then, back to sea. All involved, perhaps a bit richer, having seen the great prosperity of the descendants of those who made that courageous, original voyage, and reminded, too, of the words on the great gray cross in the small green oval of Emmett Park off Bay Street. To Americans of Irish descent, past, present, and future. Erin go bragh, Ireland forever. Mike Manhattan, WTOC News.
So for the Irish who did manage to make it over to America on ships like the Jeanie Johnston, this was still no walk in the park.
Unskilled labor. So they're coming into the United States, they don't know how to do anything. So they find work building the canals and the railroads. Unfortunately, what they also find is a lot of unscrupulous people who are running those enterprises. So fortunately for them, another group of Celts, the Scots, down at Independent Presbyterian, have sympathy for these Irish, and they formed the Hibernian Society. Sonny Dixon and I were fortunate enough to do the history of the Hibernians for their 200th anniversary.
It's St. Patrick's Day in Savannah. All the boys are on parade.
The little celebration that has become Savannah's signature was born in 1824, the child of an organization called the Hibernian Society, which was itself born in 1812 and is just this week celebrating 200 years.
It's hard to believe that James Madison was president of this country when this society was formed.
But though Savannah's St. Patrick's Day fame has spread around the world, that is not the purpose for which the Hibernian Society was founded, nor was it the Irish Catholic celebration that defines it today.
They actually met for the first time on March 17th, 1812. Many of them in Savannah particularly were from Ulster in the north, and most of those were of Scotch ancestry, and most of them were Presbyterian.
Well, most of the members were Protestant, but they welcomed Catholics into the into the society. And because of that combination, I think that the religious intolerance that certain Catholic Irish experienced in the rest of the country did not happen in Savannah.
The promise of building canals and waterways, jobs brought the Irish to Savannah. But they were set upon by robber barons with no regard for even minimum working conditions.
Life had very little value. I mean, back there they were competing for jobs with the slave population, but the slave population had a value. You know, they were purchased, and to the owner they had a value. The Irish immigrants didn't have a value.
There was abuse going on by sort of described as unscrupulous ship owners. They had brought out to Savannah from Ireland a fairly good number of men only, Irish men, to work in Savannah. But when they got here, there wasn't any work for them.
And were being put upon by unscrupulous people or the circumstances of the times. Back in 1812, you know, after all, we were about to go to war with Britain, and times were tough, and Ireland had been suppressed after the failure of the Revolution of 1798, 1799. And it was a group of people who really believed in charity in the best sense of the word.
The Hibernians were successful on behalf of the immigrant Irish. The robber barons were made to account for bleeding the defenseless newcomers to America.
Gentlemen, it is an honor to deliver the toast to the Lion of Scotland, to our Celtic brothers of St. Andrew, at tonight's gathering of our two distinguished societies.
The affection between the Scots and the Irish, which was born in that outstretched hand of 1812, is celebrated once a century, whether they need to or not. You see, the St. Andrew Society, founded in 1737, and the Hibernians, founded in 1812, just happened to be having their annual gatherings at the same time and place back in 1908. And it was then they determined to join the celebrations together. Not wanting to overstate the harmony between the tribes, the two organizations resolved to get together once a century, most recently in 2008. Minutes of the previous meeting were not read.
So here we are 200 years later, and the parade has become one of the biggest events of any kind in this part of the country.
Yeah, but important to note that the Irish would parade if nobody comes. Their roots in it go back. Tommy Brunson tells a great story of marching. He was a Benedictine, marching through the old fort section, and the little old ladies outside watching them march by, waving their kerchiefs at the boys, their champions in the street. And he said, if you didn't get a chill down your spine, you shouldn't have been there anyway, because you didn't understand what it was about. Another couple of guys who really understood what it was about, Charlie Ray and Jimmy Ray. Charlie the dad, Jimmy the son, both grand marshals. This piece kind of, I think, explains the depth of feeling the Irish have for this celebration. St. Patrick's 2005. Dan Sheehan was the grand marshal. In the Irish community, men plot sometimes for decades, always for years, to be the Grand Marshal. 2004 was to be Dan Sheehan's year, but Father Ware, God rest his soul, the first ever chaplain of the parade in 1973, was growing feeble, and there was concern that he would not be Grand Marshal if it didn't happen in 2004.
He's anticipated and longed for this day.
Yes, he has.
His old friend, Mr. Sheehan, stepped aside. Bishop McDonough noted the gracious gesture in his homily in the great cathedral on the St. Patrick's Day that belonged to Grand Marshal Ware.
Let's applaud these two gracious great Irishmen, Father Ware and Dan Sheehan.
Sheehan was a cinch for 2005.
This is y'all's moment, okay? This is your moment.
It was cold and gray on that Thursday, March 17th, the year forward, Sheehan's parade. Garrison Keillor said that God makes days like these so people who don't drink will know what a hangover looks like. Sheehan was a great marshal, raucous and tough and old-school Irish. He shook every hand and kissed every baby on the corner of Liberty and Abercorn. Sheehan had that great heart mixed with a backroom cigar-smoking quality, and the people loved him for it. Marching behind the marshal, the old guard fife and drum corps took measured steps down the center of the street. A small gap followed the redcoats, and into it walked Charlie Ray, Grand Marshal in 1989. A very certain parade adjutant, one Chat Howard, had schooled me on parade fundamentals once upon a time. "We march for our Grand Marshal," he said, without a hint of doubt. That honor still drips from past Grand Marshal Charlie Ray, whose son Jimmy is one of our announcers, along with Sonny and Tommy Brunson. I was directing the parade, and because we all love Mr. Ray, and Jimmy's one of our guys, I took the shot of him a little earlier than I normally would. Charlie Ray was a prisoner of war in World War II, a sweet man who can blow kisses to the crowd with sincerity and charm. As he made the turn, he was coaxing applause from the crowd for his presence, then abruptly cutting it off with his hands to the delight of the revelers.
Here he is, that's my dad. Look at him.
Then he made his way to St. Vincent's Corner, where our coverage was anchored. When these guys get old and frail, you can pull a picture from March 17th in the stretch of street between Lafayette Square and the Oaks of Liberty, and you can look at them on that day and know that they had their moment in the sun. Charlie Ray frolicked long enough to fall a little behind his car, and he gave a little startled look as he hustled to catch up.
Don't lose your car.
Bob, you're holding up the parade.
From the stand, Sonny and Tommy joined in the fun.
Who is this fellow walking in front of the cathedral? Looks
I
like
don't
he's
know.
lost.
Gray-headed old gentleman here appears to be lost.
Then a short litany of the Ray family's roots in the neighborhood. 3 boys and Nancy.
God bless them having Nancy. I swear, without it, it would have been terrible.
And then Mr. Ray looked up at the stand where Sonny and Tommy and Jimmy were sitting and spoke his whole heart to the air that connects that sacred space.
There's my little boy up there. Hey, Jimbo! Y'all be careful up, Tom.
His little boy was 55 that year, a Marine in his youth, and still looking much the part, tough, fit, strong.
Top of the morning to you, sir.
Not to Charlie, though. To Charlie, he was Jimbo, the pudgy baby rolling around on the floor in the den on Liberty Street. It was Mr. Ray's last parade. He wouldn't make it to 2006, or to see Jimbo elected Grand Marshal 3 Sundays ago.
Calling my mama.
Apart from Sonny, Tommy Brunson is the city's best storyteller.
Hey, this is the marshal speaking.
The richness of the Savannah experience is complete in him. Poor Irish in his downtown boyhood, and then fighting his way to success. He went to Benedictine. All of the Irish went to Benedictine, a rite of passage. Every year they talk about the polish of the belt buckles and the shine of the shoes and the razorness of the formation. And their boyhood lives again. The gathered party on the Feast of St. Patrick this year won't understand the spirit seeping into them on that same sacred ground. The soft whisper in the bells and the blessings and the pageantry of Savannah's best day. The spirit that defines a city. The spirit that makes an old man point to a television platform the last time he'll ever walk down that street and say,
There's my little boy up there. Hey, Jimbo!
You would argue that there was one giant figure who really lifted the Irish in the 20th century.
Monsignor Daniel Bourke. He came over here straight from Ireland in the early 30s, spent his life in the diocese, and among the things he did was he recruited all the other Irish priests to Savannah. All of them went to All Hallows in Ireland. That's Monsignor Keneally, that's Father McCarthy, that's Father O'Brien. And what happens is now the Irish are thick on the ground in 20th century Savannah, and their confidence rises. It's all of a sudden, it's a cool thing to be a part of the Irish in Savannah. But Monsignor's another one of those guys who you can't look at a list of accomplishments and understand them. It's really the spirit of the man, I think, that was important to know. When he passed away, I think it was 1998, I produced a program where I wrote a letter about him to my daughter Annie. I think it kind of explains the way he still is a part of our everyday conversation. I worked in television in those days, Annie, so I was able to spend many hours talking to the Monsignor. Whenever I'd end an interview, I'd always ask if there was anything else he'd like to say, or any question that I hadn't asked that he wanted to answer. Listen closely, and you'll hear me ask that here. I think that's it.
Probably.
Think of anything else?
When you go away, Craig, I think of many things.
Me too, Monsignor. It's been a lot of years, you off at college now. Just a couple of things to add to the story. A couple of months after Monsignor died, I ran into Father McCarthy at Saints and Shamrocks, and he told me they were cleaning out Monsignor's effects at Blessed Sacrament, and asked if I'd like to have Monsignor's rosary. I just call him Monsignor now. They've walked in every St. Patrick's Day parade since he died. In Hugh Coleman's pocket one year, and Tommy Brunson one year, then for the last 5 or 6 with Dr. Rossiter. But he hasn't missed a parade, and you have to make sure that continues. Last year, Sonny and I went on a bus trip around Ireland. They let me sit in the jump seat next to the driver so I could shoot out the window. Near the end of the trip, I was exhausted, and it was a rainy day, and I went to sleep in the seat. After a while, I felt the warm sun on my face, and I woke up just as we passed the sign for County Offaly, where Monsignor's from. Sure, and it was good to feel his presence.
May God, through Mary and Patrick, bless you all. Thank you, thank you.